There are just two more rules to cover here in 7.4, the last set of the rules of replacement. So first we'll go over material implication, rule number 15, and then we'll cover rule number 17, exportation. So first of all, again, rule 15, material implication, and for short, we'll just abbreviate this one, IMPL. Material implication, IMPL. IMPL really comes in quite handy. You'll use this rule frequently throughout 7.4, even perhaps into 7.5 and 7.6. Material implication, IMPL, allows us to either go from a horseshoe to a wedge, or again, as indicated by the four dots, from a wedge to a horseshoe. So we can convert horseshoe to wedge or wedge to horseshoe. And again, that's an incredibly handy rule to have at your disposal. Of course, material implication isn't quite that simple. There is an additional twist to IMPL. If we're going from horseshoe to wedge, if for instance we start with A horseshoe B, and we want to switch that horseshoe to a wedge, first of all, the order of the variables doesn't switch. A will still come first, B will still come second. We've switched the operator horseshoe to wedge. Horseshoe to wedge, you negate the first variable. So A horseshoe B is logically equivalent to, and again test it out if you like with the truth table, A horseshoe B is logically equivalent to not A or B. So that's one direction. Horseshoe to wedge, again, make sure you get this down. Horseshoe to wedge, negate only the first variable. What if, for instance, there was already a tilde out in front of the A? What if, suppose, we started with not A, horseshoe B? Well, the same rule applies. Switch the horseshoe to a wedge and negate the first variable. There's already a tilde there, so we just add one in. It becomes not A or B, and of course we know via double negation, we can, if we need to, get rid of those two tildes. So that's the most common direction, horseshoe to wedge. And going the opposite direction and going from wedge to horseshoe, you've got to take away a tilde from the first variable. Take away a tilde from the first variable, sort of undo what you've done here in going in the most common direction. So again, horseshoe to wedge, add a tilde, wedge to horseshoe, take away a tilde. And both of those directions only applies to the first variable. Let's go through one last case here for material implication. What if we started just simply with A wedge B, and we wanted to switch that operator to a horseshoe? Could we in fact pull this off? Well, again, recall, wedge to horseshoe, you've got to take away the tilde, so we couldn't immediately do it. What we would have to do if we wanted to switch it to a horseshoe is conduct an intermediate step. So let's again, suppose we started with A wedge B, wedge to horseshoe, take away a tilde. There isn't any tilde out front to take away, so the intermediate step that we would have to do is to double negate the A. That would become not A or B, and the justification, of course, one double negation. And now there's a tilde out front to take away, so we could do IMPL. Two, material implication, abbreviated IMPL. Wedge to horseshoe, take away a tilde. So we'll take away one, that'll leave one out front, and we get not A, horseshoe B. So that is rule number 15, material implication. Again, something that's quite handy. Either horseshoe to wedge, add a tilde, or wedge to horseshoe, take away a tilde. If there's not a tilde there, you either have to add it in via double negation, or you can't do it. So that's material implication. Let's finish this section off by going on to our last rule, rule number 17, exportation, EXP for short. Exportation, EXP, is one of those rules that I highly recommend that you just simply look it up in the text when you think you might use it. And I say that because the pattern has to match exactly as it's given to us here in the visual explanation. If something's off ever so slightly, then you can't do exportation. So when in doubt, consult the text, which you'll be able to do come test time. Just make sure the pattern matches exactly as it's given to you in the rule. Make sure it's exact before you proceed. But the general pattern that you're looking for in exportation is as follows. Suppose that we started with something like this. A and B grouped together, horseshoe C. What exportation allows us to do is to convert that dot into a horseshoe and simultaneously shift the parentheses really in a similar fashion as compared to associativity, one of our earlier rules. So the end result of doing exportation to this would be the following. The order of the variables doesn't change whatsoever. A still comes first, B still comes second, and C last. Further, that last operator never never changes. It starts as a horseshoe, it'll change as a horseshoe. What we're switching is the operator out here out front. So that dot becomes a horseshoe, and the final step to pulling this off is we shift the parentheses. The parentheses started on the far left, we'll shift it to the far right. So those are the steps to pulling off exportation. Switch the dot out front to a horseshoe, shift the parentheses to the far right. As is the case for all of these rules, it's a two-way street. So we can start with something like this and turn it into that, or we can go the other direction. If you start with something that looks like this, you can switch it into a dot and again shift the parentheses. Again, can't emphasize this enough, make sure that the pattern that you're working with matches up exactly as is given to you in the book. If the groupings are off a little bit, if it's not grouped just exactly as it's given to us here in the text, you can't do it. If the operators are misplaced, not exactly as they appear here in the text, then you can't do exportation. So it's a fairly tricky rule, but don't make it out to be more difficult than it needs to be. When in doubt, just real quickly look it up in the text, make sure what you're dealing with does match the pattern. If it fits the bill, then you can do it. If not, you're going to have to think about other possibilities, other options that might be at your disposal. So that completes the rules given to us in 7.4, and now we have 18 to work with. So the options that you're going to have at your disposal really are quite extensive, and the real challenge not only to master the rules, but once again, to put the whole picture together. So 7.4, to be clear, is probably the most difficult section of the entire quarter, but the good news, if we make it through 7.4, then 7.5 and 7.6, even though they come later in chapter 7, 7.5 and 7.6 are actually a little easier, actually considerably easier than 7.4. So you make it through 7.4, view this as the peak of the entire quarter, and it's all downhill from here. That's not to say 7.5 and 7.6 are easier, but certainly much easier as compared to what we're doing here in 7.4.